A Werewolf Shifter Romance by Lena, from Lena's Romance Library. Chapter 1. The Storm That Changed Everything. The blizzard came without warning, transforming the mountain highway into a treacherous ribbon of ice and snow. Emma Thorne gripped the steering wheel of her battered Honda with white knuckles, her headlights barely penetrating the wall of white ahead. She should have stayed at the motel another night, but the thought of remaining trapped in that suffocating small town for even one more hour had been unbearable. Anywhere but there, she thought, her jaw clenched with determination that had carried her through worse storms than this. The betrayal still burned fresh in her chest. 3 years of her life wasted on David, only to walk in on him with her supposed best friend Sarah in their shared apartment. The ring he'd given her last Christmas sat heavy in her pocket, a cruel reminder of how naive she'd been to believe in forever. The car shuddered as a gust of wind slammed into it, and Emma's heart lurched. She'd been driving for hours, fleeing toward the remote cabin her grandmother had left her in the Cascade Mountains. She'd never been there, but it represented the only sanctuary she had left, a place where no one could find her, where she could piece herself back together in private. A shadow moved across the road ahead. Emma slammed on the brakes, but the car was already sliding on black ice. Time slowed as she fought the wheel, watching in horror as a massive form, too large to be a dog, too wild to be anything domestic, leapt directly into her path. The impact came with a sickening thud that echoed through her bones. "No, no, no!" she gasped, finally bringing the car to a shuddering stop on the shoulder. Her hands shook as she turned on the hazard lights, their rhythmic blinking casting eerie red shadows through the swirling snow. She sat frozen for a moment, her breath coming in sharp puffs in the suddenly frigid air. The heater had died with the engine, and she could already feel the cold seeping through the windows. But worse than the cold was the knowledge that she'd hit something, someone's pet maybe, or a wild animal that didn't deserve to die because she'd been too emotional to wait out the storm. "You have to check," her conscience whispered. "You can't just leave it there." Emma pulled her wool coat tighter and stepped out into the howling wind. Snow immediately stung her face and invaded her boots as she stumbled toward the front of her car. The headlights illuminated a scene that made her stomach drop. A massive wolf lay motionless in the road, its dark fur stark against the white ground. But as she approached, she realized this wasn't just any wolf. It was enormous, easily twice the size of any wolf she'd seen in nature documentaries. Its coat was a rich black with silver markings along its muzzle and legs, and even unconscious, it radiated a power that made the hair on her arms stand up. "Oh, God," she whispered, dropping to her knees beside the animal despite every survival instinct screaming at her to get back in the car. "I'm so sorry." She reached out tentatively, expecting to find the wolf dead or dying, but her fingers found a strong, steady heartbeat beneath the thick fur. Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by a new kind of panic. What was she supposed to do with an injured wolf in the middle of a blizzard? As if summoned by her thoughts, the wolf's eyes fluttered open. Emma gasped and jerked backward, but she was caught by the most extraordinary sight she'd ever witnessed. The wolf's eyes weren't the yellow or amber she expected. They were a deep, startling blue that seemed almost human in their intelligence. The wolf tried to lift its head, letting out a low whine of pain. Emma watched in amazement as those blue eyes focused on her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if the animal could see straight through to her soul. "Easy," she murmured, the same tone she'd used to comfort frightened animals during her volunteer work at the shelter back home. "You're hurt. I need to help you." The logical part of her mind was screaming that this was insane. Wolves were dangerous predators, and she was completely alone on a deserted mountain road. But something about this creature's gaze held her captive, made her forget every warning she'd ever heard about wild animals. She looked back at her car, its engine ticking as it cooled in the storm. The nearest town was at least 20 miles behind her, and her cell phone had lost signal hours ago. The cabin she'd been heading toward was still 15 miles ahead, but she had no idea if the road would even be passable. "I can't leave you here," she said, more to herself than to the wolf. "You'll freeze to death." The wind howled around them, and Emma realized they were both going to freeze if she didn't make a decision soon. Her car was small, but maybe... "I know this is crazy," she said, looking into those impossibly blue eyes. "But I think you understand me. I'm going to try to get you to my car, okay? Please don't bite me." The wolf made a sound that was almost like a sigh, and somehow Emma interpreted it as agreement. She grabbed the emergency blanket from her trunk and carefully worked it under the massive animal. The wolf was incredibly heavy, easily over 150 pounds of solid muscle, but desperation gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. It took 20 minutes of struggling through the deepening snow to get the wolf positioned in her back seat. The animal remained cooperative but clearly in pain, its breathing shallow and its beautiful blue eyes never leaving her face. Once she had the creature secured, Emma climbed back into the driver's seat, her clothes soaked through with snow and sweat. "Okay," she said, her voice shaky from cold and adrenaline. "The cabin isn't far. We just have to make it that far." She coaxed the engine back to life and pulled carefully back onto the road. In the rearview mirror, she could see the wolf watching her, and she had the strangest feeling that it was studying her rather than simply existing in the space behind her. The drive to the cabin was a nightmare of white-knuckle tension and prayer. The road climbed steadily into the mountains, and more than once Emma felt the car's tires lose their grip on the icy pavement. But somehow, probably by sheer luck and stubbornness, she made it to the address her grandmother's lawyer had given her. The cabin was larger than she'd expected, a sturdy log structure with a wraparound porch and large windows that would probably offer stunning mountain views in daylight. Right now, it looked like something out of a fairy tale, covered in snow and surrounded by towering pines that swayed ominously in the wind. Emma had barely parked when exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. The emotional trauma of the day, combined with the stress of the drive and the bizarre situation she'd gotten herself into, left her feeling wrung out and shaky. But the wolf in her back seat needed care, and the temperature was dropping fast. The key was where the lawyer had promised, hidden under a fake rock by the front door. The cabin was cold but dry, and Emma quickly located the electrical panel and got the power restored. Heat began flowing from baseboard heaters, and she breathed a sigh of relief. "Okay," she said, going back to the car. "Now comes the hard part." Getting the wolf from the car to the cabin was even more difficult than loading it had been. The animal seemed to be getting weaker, and Emma was terrified that internal injuries were causing it to fail. She managed to drag the blanket and its precious burden up the porch steps and through the front door, finally getting the wolf positioned on a thick rug in front of the fireplace. The cabin was simply but comfortably furnished, clearly designed as a retreat rather than a permanent residence. Emma found firewood already stacked beside the hearth and soon had a crackling fire going. In the warm, flickering light, she got her first really good look at the wolf she'd rescued. It was magnificent and terrible at the same time. The creature was larger than any wolf had a right to be, its proportions somehow more elegant and powerful than nature usually allowed. But it was the wolf's eyes that continued to captivate her. In the firelight, they seemed to hold depths of intelligence and emotion that made Emma's breath catch. "What are you?" she whispered, settling down beside the animal on the rug. She'd studied biology in college and had never heard of wolves this size existing in North America. The creature seemed almost prehistoric, like something that should have been extinct for thousands of years. But here it was, breathing softly in her grandmother's cabin, those stunning blue eyes tracking her every movement. Emma checked the wolf's body carefully for obvious injuries, running her hands through the thick fur to feel for broken bones or wounds. She found a few scrapes and what felt like a bruised rib, but nothing that seemed life-threatening. The animal tolerated her examination with remarkable patience, even seeming to lean into her touch at times. "You're not a normal wolf, are you?" she said softly, her fingers finding a particularly sensitive spot behind the creature's ears. "There's something different about you." The wolf made a sound that was almost like a purr, and Emma felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. She'd always been good with animals, but this felt like something more than her usual rapport with frightened creatures. This felt like connection. She settled more comfortably against the couch, one hand resting on the wolf's massive flank to monitor its breathing. The fire crackled peacefully, and for the first time since walking in on David's betrayal, Emma felt a measure of peace settling over her. "I guess we're both refugees tonight," she said quietly. "Both running from something, both ending up here by accident." The wolf's breathing had evened out, and she could feel the steady rhythm of its heartbeat under her palm. Whatever this creature was, wherever it had come from, she was committed now. She would nurse it back to health. And then, well, she supposed she'd figure that out when the time came. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, woman and wolf found an unexpected sanctuary together. Neither of them could have guessed how completely this night would change both their lives, or that the bond forming between them was far deeper and more mysterious than either could imagine. As Emma drifted towards sleep, her hand still resting protectively on the wolf's fur, she thought she heard something impossible, a whispered, "Thank you," that seemed to come from the creature beside her. But that was ridiculous, of course. Wolves couldn't talk. Could they? Chapter 2. Strange Behaviors. Emma woke to silence so complete it felt oppressive. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and ice. Pale morning light filtered through the cabin's windows, illuminating dancing dust motes and casting everything in ethereal silver. She became aware of two things simultaneously. First, that she'd slept curled up on the floor beside the fireplace, and second, that the massive wolf she'd rescued was no longer there. "No," she breathed, struggling to her feet. Her back protested the night spent on the hard floor, but panic overrode physical discomfort. Had the wolf crawled away to die? Had it somehow gotten outside? A sound from the kitchen made her freeze, the distinct clink of ceramic against wood. Emma crept toward the sound, her heart hammering against her ribs. What she saw when she peered around the doorframe defied every law of nature she knew. The wolf sat on its haunches beside the kitchen island, its massive head tilted as it examined a coffee mug that had definitely not been on the counter the night before. Steam rose from the mug, and the rich aroma of coffee filled the air. "That's impossible," Emma whispered. The wolf's head turned toward her, those remarkable blue eyes meeting hers with an expression that seemed almost guilty. The creature whined softly and nudged the mug with its nose, as if offering it to her. Emma approached cautiously, her mind reeling. Wolves didn't make coffee. Wolves didn't understand the concept of hospitality. Yet here was undeniable evidence that her patient had somehow prepared hot coffee while she slept. "How?" she asked, reaching for the mug with trembling fingers. The coffee was perfect. Not too strong, not too weak. Exactly the way she preferred it, though she'd never told anyone, let alone a wild animal, about her preferences. The wolf watched her take her first sip, and Emma could swear she saw satisfaction in those intelligent eyes. When she lowered the mug, the creature moved closer, pressing its massive head against her thigh in what could only be described as an affectionate gesture. "This is insane," she murmured, but she found herself stroking the wolf's ears anyway. The fur was incredibly soft, warmer than it should have been. and she could feel the strength in the muscles beneath. "You're not supposed to be able to do things like this." The wolf made a sound that was remarkably like a chuckle, and Emma felt her world tilt further off its axis. She'd spent her life as a rational person, believing in science and logic and the natural order of things. But nothing about this situation fit into those neat categories. She spent the morning exploring the cabin, trying to process what was happening while the wolf followed her like an enormous, devoted dog. Her grandmother had left the place well stocked with food, linens, and books. Emma found a leather-bound journal in the bedroom nightstand, filled with her grandmother's careful handwriting. The old legends speak of creatures that walk between worlds. One passage read, "Neither fully human, nor fully beast, but something far more magnificent than either alone. They say such beings are drawn to pure souls, to those who see with their hearts rather than their eyes." Emma stared at the page, her coffee growing cold in her hands. Her grandmother had always been eccentric, full of stories about magic and mystery that had delighted Emma as a child, but seemed like harmless fantasy as an adult. Now, with the impossible wolf watching her every move, those old stories took on new significance. "Gran, what did you know?" she asked the empty room. The wolf approached and gently took the journal from her hands, carrying it to the window where the afternoon light was brightest. The gesture was so deliberately helpful that Emma felt another piece of her rational worldview crumble. She continued reading, finding more passages about shapeshifters, ancient curses, and the power of true love to break supernatural bonds. It read like a collection of fairy tales, but the wolf's behavior suggested there might be more truth in those pages than she'd ever imagined. That evening, as they shared a dinner that the wolf had somehow helped prepare by bringing her ingredients and even opening cans with its teeth, Emma decided to test a theory. "If you can understand me," she said, looking directly into those blue eyes, "show me. Do something that proves you're more than just a wolf." The creature stared at her for a long moment, then rose and walked to the fireplace. With careful precision, it selected 3 logs from the woodpile and arranged them in the hearth. Then, to Emma's amazement, it somehow managed to light the kindling with what looked like a flint and steel it had retrieved from a drawer. Emma watched the fire catch and grow, her mouth open in shock. That's not possible. Wolves don't have opposable thumbs. They can't manipulate tools." The wolf returned to sit beside her, its head tilted in what she was learning to recognize as its thinking expression. Then it did something that stopped her heart completely. It placed one massive paw on her hand and looked directly into her eyes, as if it were trying to communicate something vital. The touch sent electricity through Emma's entire body. It wasn't just the warmth of the wolf's paw or the softness of its fur. It was something deeper, more fundamental, a recognition that seemed to come from her very soul. "I feel like I know you," she whispered, hardly daring to voice the impossible thought. "But that's crazy, isn't it? I've never seen you before last night." The wolf's eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, Emma saw something that made her breath catch. There was pain there, deep and ancient, but also hope. Desperate, fragile hope that seemed to hinge entirely on her. "What happened to you?" she asked, her free hand moving instinctively to stroke the wolf's head. "What are you running from?" The creature leaned into her touch, and Emma felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest. It was the same feeling she'd experienced the night before, but stronger now. A sense of connection that transcended anything she'd ever felt with another living being. They spent the evening in comfortable silence, Emma reading her grandmother's journal while the wolf dozed beside the fire. But she could feel the creature's attention even in sleep, as if some part of it remained always aware of her presence. As night fell, Emma made up the bed in the master bedroom, assuming the wolf would remain by the fire. But when she emerged from the bathroom after brushing her teeth, she found the creature lying across the doorway, clearly intending to stand guard. "You don't have to protect me," she said softly. "I'm safe here." The wolf lifted its head and gave her a look that seemed to say, "Not from everything." A chill ran down Emma's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "What aren't you telling me? What's out there that I should be afraid of?" But the wolf simply laid its head down on its paws and closed its eyes, effectively ending the conversation. Emma climbed into bed, but sleep was a long time coming. She found herself listening to every sound outside the cabin, wondering what dangers might be lurking in the dark woods beyond. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were filled with running through moonlit forests, her feet bare against cold earth and her heart racing with exhilaration rather than fear. In the dreams, she wasn't alone. A presence ran beside her, protective and powerful, matching her pace perfectly. She woke several times during the night to find the wolf watching her, those blue eyes reflecting the moonlight streaming through the windows. Each time she felt a strange comfort in that vigilant gaze, as if the creature's presence was the only thing standing between her and some nameless threat. By morning, Emma had accepted that nothing about her situation was normal. But strangely, that acceptance brought a kind of peace. She was in uncharted territory, but she wasn't alone. Whatever the wolf was, wherever it had come from, she was committed to helping it. Even if that meant questioning everything she thought she knew about the world. Chapter 3. Growing Attraction. The third day brought a thaw that turned the snow to slush and filled the air with the sound of dripping water. Emma woke to find the wolf, she really needed to think of a name for it, sitting by the window with an almost human expression of longing on its face. "You want to go outside," she observed, pulling on her warmest clothes. "Come on, let's explore." The morning air was crisp but no longer bitter, and Emma's breath misted as she stepped onto the porch. The wolf bounded past her with obvious joy, leaping through the slush like a puppy, rather than the massive predator it appeared to be. Emma followed more carefully, testing each step on the slippery deck. She'd made it halfway across when her foot slipped on a patch of ice. She windmilled her arms, knowing she was about to fall hard on the wooden planks, when something solid and warm caught her from behind. She found herself pressed against the wolf's chest, the creature having somehow positioned itself to break her fall. But what made her breath catch wasn't the rescue. It was the way the wolf's body seemed to curve around hers, protective and possessive, as if she belonged there. "Thank you," she whispered, her hands somehow having ended up buried in the thick fur at the creature's neck. The wolf was warm, almost hot, and she could feel the steady rhythm of its heartbeat against her palms. The wolf made a low sound, deep in its chest that vibrated through Emma's entire body. It wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite a purr, but something uniquely its own that made heat pool low in her belly. "This is wrong," her rational mind protested. "You're attracted to a wolf. That's not just crazy, it's impossible." But her body didn't care about impossibility. All it knew was that this creature made her feel safe and desired and alive in ways she'd never experienced with David or any human man. There was something primal in the way the wolf looked at her, something that called to a part of herself she'd never known existed. They stayed frozen in that moment, woman and wolf, until a distant howl echoed through the mountains. The wolf's head snapped up immediately, its entire body going rigid with tension. The sound came again, closer this time, and Emma felt the creature's protective instincts kick into overdrive. The wolf gently but firmly pushed Emma toward the cabin door, its meaning clear. "Get inside. Now." "What is it?" she asked, but she allowed herself to be herded onto the porch. "Is something coming?" The answer came in the form of 3 wolves emerging from the tree line. These were normal-sized animals, but they moved with purpose that made Emma's skin crawl. Their yellow eyes were fixed on the cabin, and their body language spoke of aggression rather than curiosity. Her wolf, when had she started thinking of it as hers, stepped in front of her, its massive frame blocking her from the newcomer's view. The growl that rumbled from its chest was nothing like the gentle sounds it had made for her. This was the voice of an apex predator, a warning that promised violence if the threat wasn't heeded. The three wolves circled closer, and Emma realized they were surrounding the cabin. Her hands shook as she fumbled for the door handle, understanding instinctively that she was witnessing something far more complex than a simple territorial dispute. "Come inside," she urged her protector. "We'll lock the doors." But the wolf shook its massive head and took another step toward the circling pack. The message was clear. It would face this threat alone rather than lead danger to her doorstep. "No," Emma said firmly, surprising herself with the authority in her voice. "I'm not leaving you out here to fight alone." She grabbed the heaviest coat she could find and stepped back outside, ignoring the wolf's obvious distress at her decision. The three intruders had stopped their circling and were now watching her with an intelligence that made her stomach clench with fear. These weren't ordinary wolves any more than her companion was. There was something calculated in their gaze, something that spoke of minds capable of planning and strategy. They were evaluating her, trying to determine what she meant to their quarry. The largest of the three, a gray-brown male with scars across his muzzle, took a step forward. Emma's wolf immediately moved to intercept, placing itself directly between her and the threat. The two males stared at each other for a long, tense moment, some form of communication passing between them that Emma couldn't understand. Then the scarred wolf did something that made Emma's blood run cold. It shifted its gaze to her and smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp and too knowing for any natural animal. The attack came without warning. The three wolves launched themselves at Emma's protector with coordinated precision, clearly intending to overwhelm through superior numbers. But they had underestimated their opponent's size and strength. Emma watched in horrified fascination as her wolf fought with a skill and ferocity that seemed almost choreographed. It moved like a creature trained for battle, using its superior size to devastating effect while avoiding the snapping jaws of its attackers. The fight was brief but vicious. When it ended, two of the attackers limped away into the forest, supporting each other. The third, the scarred male who had smiled at Emma, lay motionless in the bloody slush. Emma's wolf stood over the fallen enemy, its sides heaving with exertion. Blood matted its fur, and Emma could see several wounds that would need attention. But when it turned to look at her, those blue eyes held triumph rather than pain. "You're hurt," she said, rushing toward the creature without thought for her own safety. "Let me help." She guided the wolf back into the cabin, her hands shaking with adrenaline. The fight had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it had shown her a side of her companion she'd never imagined. This was no ordinary animal. This was a warrior, something bred or trained for combat. As she cleaned and bandaged the worst of the wounds, Emma found herself studying the wolf's body with new eyes. The scars she'd noticed before weren't from accidents or chance encounters. They were battle wounds, evidence of a life filled with violence and conflict. "What are you?" she whispered as she worked. "What kind of life have you lived?" The wolf's eyes closed as she tended its injuries, but Emma could feel the tension in its muscles. It was listening for sounds of pursuit, ready to fight again if necessary. That night, as they sat by the fire, Emma found herself hyper-aware of every detail about her companion. The way the firelight caught the silver markings in its fur, the precise movements of its ears as it tracked sounds outside, the controlled power in every line of its body. She was attracted to it, not just emotionally, but physically. The realization should have horrified her, but instead it felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. This creature, whatever it was, called to something deep within her soul. "I don't care what you are," she said quietly, her hand resting on the wolf's flank. "I don't care if you're not normal. You protected me today. You've been nothing but gentle with me. That's what matters." The wolf lifted its head to look at her, and Emma saw something shift in those extraordinary eyes. Hope, yes, but also something deeper, something that looked remarkably like love. When she went to bed that night, the wolf followed her into the bedroom without being invited. It settled on the rug beside the bed, close enough that Emma could reach down and touch its fur. The gesture felt natural, necessary, as if some part of her would remain incomplete without that physical connection. Her dreams that night were more vivid than ever. She ran through moonlit forests again, but this time she wasn't alone in human form. Something magnificent ran beside her, matching her pace, sharing her joy in the wild freedom of the night. When she woke near dawn, she found herself reaching for a presence that wasn't there, mourning the loss of something she couldn't quite remember, but desperately missed. The wolf was watching her from beside the bed, those blue eyes holding a longing that matched her own. Emma sat up, suddenly understanding that the dreams weren't just fantasies. They were memories of something that hadn't happened yet. A glimpse of a future that might be possible if she was brave enough to embrace it. "Show me," she whispered to the wolf. "Show me who you really are." Chapter 4. Building Trust. The fourth day dawned clear and cold, with a brilliance that made the snow-covered mountains look like something from a postcard. Emma woke to find the wolf sitting by the window again, but this time its posture was different. Less alert, more contemplative. "You're thinking about leaving," she said, the words coming from some instinct she didn't fully understand. The wolf's head turned toward her, and she saw the conflict in those blue eyes. It wanted to stay, but something was pulling it away. Some obligation or responsibility that it couldn't abandon, even for her. Emma climbed out of bed and joined the creature by the window. In the distance, she could see the spot where yesterday's fight had taken place. The snow had covered most of the evidence, but she knew it was there. A reminder that her sanctuary wasn't as isolated as she'd believed. "They'll come back, won't they?" she asked. "Those other wolves?" The creature's silence was answer enough. "And you can't stay here to protect me forever. You have somewhere else you need to be." This time, the wolf whined softly, pressing its massive head against her hip. The gesture was so full of regret and longing that Emma felt tears sting her eyes. "I understand," she said, her hand automatically moving to stroke the soft fur behind its ears. "I've been running away too, but eventually, we all have to face what we're running from." They spent the morning in companionable silence, Emma reading her grandmother's journal while the wolf dozed fitfully by the fire. But she could sense its restlessness, the way it kept lifting its head to listen to sounds she couldn't hear. It was in the journal's final pages that Emma found the passage that changed everything. The old bloodlines carry burdens that ordinary folk cannot understand. They are born to lead, to protect, to sacrifice their own happiness for the good of their people. But even the strongest alpha can be brought low by isolation, can lose themselves in the weight of responsibility they bear alone. It is said that only one thing can heal such a wounded soul: the touch of a true mate, someone whose spirit calls to theirs across the veil between worlds. But the path to such healing is never simple, for it requires both souls to risk everything they are for the promise of what they might become together. Emma read the passage 3 times, her heart pounding harder with each repetition. Her grandmother had known. Somehow, impossibly, she had known that Emma would end up here, with this creature, facing this choice. "Gran was a sly old witch," she murmured, and was startled when the wolf made a sound that was unmistakably laughter. She looked up to find the creature watching her with an expression of fond amusement, as if it had known her grandmother personally and agreed with Emma's assessment. "Did you know her?" Emma asked, the pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to form in her mind. "Is that why you were on that road? Were you coming here?" The wolf's ears drooped slightly, and Emma interpreted that as a yes to her first question and a no to her second. It had known her grandmother, but ending up on that mountain road had been an accident, or perhaps fate. Emma closed the journal and moved to sit directly in front of the creature. At this angle, with the firelight dancing across its features, she could see subtle variations in its bone structure that seemed almost human. The proportions were wrong for a wolf, too refined, too expressive. "You're not just a wolf, are you?" she said quietly. "You're something else, something that can choose what form you take." The wolf's eyes widened slightly, and Emma felt a thrill of understanding shoot through her. She was right. She didn't know how or why she knew, but she was absolutely certain. "Show me," she whispered, reaching out to place both hands on either side of the creature's massive head. "I'm not afraid. Show me who you really are." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Emma felt something shift beneath her hands, not physically, but energetically, as if the very air around them was changing. The wolf's eyes closed, and she felt a tremor run through its powerful body. Light began to emanate from the creature's fur, soft at first but growing brighter. Emma watched in wonder as the wolf's form began to blur and shift, bones lengthening, muscles reconfiguring, fur receding to reveal smooth skin. The transformation was beautiful and terrible, like watching a miracle and a tragedy unfold simultaneously. Emma kept her hands in place throughout, feeling the change occurring beneath her palms, anchoring the shifting creature with her touch. When the light faded, Emma found herself looking into the face of the most beautiful man she'd ever seen. He was still large, well over 6 feet tall, even seated on the floor, with broad shoulders and a powerful build that spoke of both strength and grace. His hair was black with silver streaks at the temples, and his skin held a golden warmth that seemed to glow in the firelight. But it was his eyes that stole Emma's breath. They were the same impossible blue, filled with the same intelligence and emotion she'd grown to love. "Hello, Emma," he said, his voice rough with disuse but unmistakably human. "My name is Alexander." Emma stared at him, her mind reeling. The rational part of her was screaming that this was impossible, that people didn't just transform from wolves into men. But a deeper part of her, the part that had been dreaming of running through moonlit forests, accepted the truth with perfect calm. "You're beautiful," she whispered, her hands still framing his face. Alexander's eyes closed at her words, and she saw a shoulder run through his powerful frame. "Emma, you don't understand. I'm dangerous. You're perfect," she interrupted, her thumbs stroking across his cheekbones. "You're exactly what I've been waiting for my whole life, even when I didn't know I was waiting." "I'm the alpha king of the Northwestern Pack," he said, his voice heavy with pain and responsibility. "Those wolves yesterday were sent by my brother, Marcus. He wants to challenge me for leadership, and he'll use anything, anyone, to get to me. By being here, by caring for me, you've painted a target on yourself." Emma absorbed this information, feeling the weight of it settle around them like a shroud. An alpha king. No wonder the creature, Alexander, had moved with such authority, had fought with such skill. No wonder other wolves had come looking for him. "Your brother wants to kill you," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Yes, and when he finds out about you—" Alexander's hands came up to cover hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. Emma, I have to leave. Tonight. If I stay any longer, I'll never be able to let you go, and that will get us both killed. Then don't let me go, Emma said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Take me with you. Alexander's eyes snapped open, blazing with a mixture of hope and terror. You don't know what you're saying. You don't understand what it would mean. I understand that I've spent my whole life feeling like something was missing. I understand that in 3 days, you've made me feel more alive than I did in 3 years with David. I understand that when I thought you might die, something inside me nearly died too. Emma leaned closer until her forehead was almost touching his. I understand that whatever you are, wherever you come from, you're mine, and I'm yours. Emma. Her name was a prayer on his lips. I'm not afraid, she said firmly. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Alexander stared at her for a long moment, and Emma saw the exact instant when his resolve crumbled. His hands tightened on hers, and he leaned forward until his lips were barely an inch from her own. If we do this, he whispered, his breath warm against her mouth, there's no going back. The bond between true mates. It's permanent, Emma. Unbreakable. Are you sure you're ready for that? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, she breathed. And then he was kissing her, and Emma's world exploded into sensation. His lips were warm and soft, but there was nothing gentle about the way he claimed her mouth. This was possession, desperation, love and need all wrapped into one overwhelming moment. Emma melted into him, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair. She could taste something wild on his lips, something that spoke of moonlight and forest air and freedom beyond imagination. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Mine. Alexander growled against her lips, the word vibrating through her entire body. Yours, Emma agreed, and felt something deep inside her soul click into place, like a lock finding its key. Chapter 5. Dangerous Obstacles. They had exactly 6 hours of peace before everything went to hell. Emma woke wrapped in Alexander's arms, her back pressed against his chest, his breath warm against her neck. He was still in human form, and she could feel the steady beat of his heart against her spine. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe that they could stay like this forever, safe, hidden, complete. Then she heard the howls. They came from multiple directions, echoing off the mountains in a chorus that made her blood run cold. These weren't the calls of ordinary wolves. These were the voices of a hunting pack, coordinated and purposeful. Alexander was awake instantly, his body going rigid with tension. They found us, he said, his voice deadly quiet. Marcus brought more wolves than I expected. Emma sat up, fear making her movements sharp and quick. How many? At least a dozen, Alexander said, already moving toward the window. Maybe more. He turned back to her, his blue eyes fierce with determination. Emma, listen to me carefully. There's a trail behind the cabin that leads up the mountain. Follow it for exactly 2 miles until you reach a cave marked with 3 scratches on the right side. Wait for me there. I'm not leaving you, Emma said immediately. This isn't a discussion, Alexander replied, his alpha authority bleeding through in his voice. Marcus wants to challenge me for leadership of the pack. The fight has to be between him and me alone. If you're here, he'll use you against me. The howls were getting closer, and Emma could see shapes moving between the trees. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the reality of their situation crashed over her. This was really happening. The man she'd fallen in love with was about to fight for his life, and there was nothing she could do to help. Promise me you'll be careful, she said, grabbing his face between her hands. Promise me you'll come back to me. I promise, he said, kissing her fiercely. "Now go." Emma threw on her clothes and boots, grabbing the emergency pack Alexander thrust at her. At the back door, she turned for one last look at the man who had become her everything in the space of 4 days. He had shifted back to wolf form, and he stood in the center of the cabin like a king preparing for battle. His fur gleamed in the morning light, and his blue eyes burned with deadly intent. He was magnificent and terrifying, and Emma's heart swelled with pride even as it broke with fear. "I love you," she whispered. "And I love you," came the reply, not spoken aloud but heard clearly in her mind. "Now run." Emma ran. The trail was steep and treacherous, covered with ice and loose rocks that threatened to send her tumbling down the mountainside. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of battle, snarls and growls, and the terrible sound of fangs meeting flesh. Every instinct screamed at her to go back, to help, to stand by her mate's side. But Alexander had trusted her to follow his orders, and she wouldn't let him down. The cave he'd described was exactly where he'd said it would be, marked with 3 parallel scratches that looked like claw marks. Emma ducked inside, finding it larger than she'd expected, with evidence of previous occupation, old camping gear, emergency supplies, even a battery-powered radio. She turned on the radio, desperate for any distraction from the sounds of fighting that echoed up from the valley below. What she heard made her blood freeze. Reports of unusual wolf activity in the Cascade Mountains. Local authorities are advising all residents to stay indoors until the situation is resolved. Game wardens report finding evidence of an extremely large pack, possibly including hybrid animals of unprecedented size. Emma turned off the radio, her hands shaking. The outside world was starting to notice. Whatever was happening down at the cabin, it was big enough to attract attention from people who had no idea about shapeshifters, or alpha kings, or ancient bloodlines. Time crawled by with agonizing slowness. Emma paced the small cave, started at every sound, and tried not to imagine all the ways the fight below could go wrong. She'd seen Alexander fight 3 wolves and emerge victorious, but a dozen or more was a completely different challenge. When the howling finally stopped, the silence was worse than the noise had been. Emma waited, counting her heartbeats, straining her ears for any sound that might tell her what had happened. Minutes passed, then an hour. The sun moved across the sky, and still there was no sign of Alexander. "Something's wrong," she thought, her chest tight with panic. He should have been here by now. Against every instruction he'd given her, Emma packed up the emergency supplies and started back down the mountain. She moved carefully, using the trees as cover, terrified of what she might find at the cabin. The first thing she saw was the blood. It was everywhere, splattered across the cabin walls, staining the snow, painting the trees in violent red streaks. The battle had been brutal, and there was far too much blood for everyone to have walked away. The second thing she saw was the wolves. They were still in their animal forms, but they moved with human intelligence as they searched the area around the cabin. Emma counted at least 8 of them, all larger than normal wolves, but none as massive as Alexander had been. They were looking for something, or someone. The third thing she saw made her heart stop completely. Alexander lay motionless at the center of the carnage, back in human form, his body covered in wounds that painted his skin crimson. A massive gray wolf stood over him, larger than the others, but still smaller than Alexander. This had to be Marcus, the brother who wanted to claim the Alpha crown. Emma watched in horror as Marcus shifted to human form, revealing a man who shared Alexander's basic features but twisted them into something cruel and predatory. He had the same black hair, the same powerful build, but where Alexander's eyes held warmth and intelligence, Marcus's burned with cold ambition. "Still breathing, brother," Marcus said, nudging Alexander with his foot. "How disappointing. I was hoping to make this quick." Alexander didn't respond, but Emma could see his chest rising and falling. He was alive, but barely. The human girl got away, one of the other wolves reported, still in animal form. Should we track her? Oh, we'll find her, Marcus said with a smile that made Emma's skin crawl. After all, she's the key to keeping dear Alexander compliant. He's always been soft-hearted about protecting the innocent. Emma's mind raced. She was outnumbered and outmatched, with no weapons and no way to call for help. But she couldn't just watch them torture or kill Alexander. She had to do something. Her eyes fell on her grandmother's journal, still clutched in her hand from her hurried packing. The old woman's words echoed in her memory. Only one thing can heal such a wounded soul, the touch of a true mate. Emma didn't fully understand what being Alexander's true mate meant in practical terms, but she'd felt the connection between them, felt the way their souls seemed to recognize each other. If there was any truth to her grandmother's writings, maybe that connection could work both ways. Taking a deep breath, Emma stepped out from behind the trees. "Looking for me?" she called out, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. 8 pairs of predatory eyes turned toward her, and Emma felt like a rabbit that had just announced itself to a pack of wolves. Which, she realized with hysterical clarity, was exactly what had happened. "Well, well," Marcus said, his smile widening. "How convenient. The little human comes to us." "Let him go," Emma said, walking slowly toward the center of the clearing. "Your fight is with Alexander, not with me." "Oh, my dear naive girl," Marcus laughed. "You are the fight. Do you really think Alexander would have been so easy to defeat if he hadn't been distracted by worry for you? You're his weakness, which makes you my greatest weapon." Emma's heart clenched, but she kept walking. She was almost close enough to touch Alexander now, close enough to see the extent of his injuries. He was hurt badly, claw marks across his chest, bite wounds on his arms and legs, blood matting his hair where something had struck his skull. But his eyes were open, and they were focused on her with desperate intensity. "Run," she heard in her mind, his voice weak but urgent. "Emma, please, just run." "I'm not leaving you," she thought back, praying that their connection worked both ways. "We're in this together, remember?" "How touching," Marcus sneered. "True love conquers all, is that it? Let's see how true your love is when it's tested." He signaled to 2 of his wolves, who immediately began advancing on Emma with hungry grins. She could see the anticipation in their eyes, the predatory excitement of hunters who had cornered their prey. Emma dropped to her knees beside Alexander, placing her hands on his bloodied chest. His skin was cold, too cold, and she could feel his strength fading with each labored breath. "I'm here," she whispered, leaning down to press her lips to his forehead. "I'm not going anywhere." The moment her lips touched his skin, Emma felt electricity shoot through her entire body. It was the same sensation she'd experienced when they kissed, but magnified 1,000-fold. Power flowed between them, ancient and primal, older than human civilization. Alexander's eyes blazed brighter, and Emma felt his strength beginning to return. The connection between them was more than emotional. It was magical, supernatural, a bond that transcended the physical world. The attacking wolves stopped in their tracks, confused by the sudden change in the air around them. Marcus snarled, recognizing the power building between Emma and Alexander, even if he didn't understand its source. "Kill them both," he ordered. "Now, before—" He never finished the sentence. Alexander erupted from the ground with inhuman speed, his wounds already beginning to heal, his strength restored by Emma's touch. He shifted mid-leap, his human form flowing seamlessly into that of the massive black wolf she'd first encountered on the mountain road. But this time, Emma could feel his power as if it were her own. Through their bond, she experienced the incredible rush of the transformation, the way his senses sharpened and his strength multiplied. She was still human, still physically vulnerable, but she was no longer powerless. The battle that followed was swift and decisive. Alexander fought with the fury of a true alpha protecting his mate, and the other wolves quickly realized they were outmatched. Marcus tried to rally them, but his authority crumbled in the face of Alexander's restored power. Within minutes, the surviving challengers were fleeing into the forest, leaving Marcus to face his brother alone. Chapter 6. The Secret Unveiled. The confrontation between the two brothers was nothing like the chaotic battle that had preceded it. This was personal, ancient, weighted with years of resentment and rivalry. Alexander and Marcus circled each other in the blood-stained clearing, both in human form now, both bearing the scars of a lifetime of conflict. Emma watched from where Alexander had gently but firmly positioned her, close enough to maintain their connection, far enough away to be safe from the violence. "You always were father's favorite," Marcus said, his voice bitter with old wounds. "The chosen heir, the perfect son, the one destined to lead." "I never asked for it," Alexander replied, his voice sad rather than angry. "You could have been my partner, Marcus. My second in command. We could have led the pack together." "As your subordinate," Marcus spat. "Always second best. Always in your shadow." Emma could feel Alexander's pain through their bond. Not physical pain, but the deeper agony of watching someone he'd once loved transform into an enemy. These weren't just rivals. They were brothers who had grown up together, played together, probably once protected each other. "It doesn't have to be this way," Alexander said. "Walk away, Marcus. Take whoever wants to follow you and start your own pack. I won't stop you. And let you keep the crown? Let you play king with your human pet?" Marcus's eyes flicked to Emma with undisguised contempt. "I don't think so." "Leave her out of this," Alexander warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "She's already in it," Marcus replied. "The moment you chose a weak human over your own kind, you proved you're not fit to lead. An alpha's mate should strengthen the bloodline, not pollute it." Emma flinched at the venom in his words, but Alexander's rage blazed through their connection like wildfire. She had never felt such fury, such pure protective instinct focused into a single point of light. "You know nothing about strength," Alexander said, his body beginning to shimmer with the energy of an approaching transformation. "True strength comes from love, from having something worth protecting. You've never understood that." "Pretty words," Marcus sneered, his own body beginning to change. "Let's see how much your love protects you now." The shift happened simultaneously, both men flowing into their wolf forms with practiced ease. But where Alexander's transformation had always seemed natural and beautiful to Emma, Marcus's felt wrong somehow, forced and violent, as if he were fighting against his own nature. The two wolves were similar in size, both far larger than ordinary animals, but their fighting styles were completely different. Alexander moved with fluid grace, every motion calculated and efficient. Marcus fought with brutal intensity, all savage aggression and desperate hunger. They clashed in the center of the clearing, fangs and claws seeking vulnerable spots with deadly precision. Emma watched in terror and fascination as her mate, she realized, the word finally making complete sense, battled for his life and his crown. The fight was brutal but brief. Marcus was strong and vicious, but he lacked Alexander's experience and discipline. Within minutes, he was pinned beneath his brother's massive form, Alexander's jaws clamped around his throat in a hold that could crush his windpipe with the slightest pressure. Emma expected Alexander to kill him, by the laws Marcus himself had invoked, challenging the Alpha was punishable by death. But Alexander held the position for a long moment, then released his brother and backed away. Marcus shifted back to human form, gasping and clutching his throat. His eyes burned with humiliation and rage, but also with something that might have been surprise. "Why?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Why didn't you finish it?" "Because you're my brother," Alexander replied, also human again. "Because despite everything you've done, I still remember the boy who used to have nightmares and crawl into my bed for protection." Marcus stared at him for a long moment, and Emma saw a flicker of the child Alexander remembered cross his features. Then his face hardened again, the moment of vulnerability snapping closed like a trap. "This isn't over," he said, struggling to his feet. "I'll challenge you again." "No," Alexander said quietly. "You won't. Because next time, I won't be so merciful. Take whoever wants to follow you and go, Marcus. Start your own pack. Find your own territory. But if you ever threaten Emma again, if you ever come after her, I will hunt you down and end you. Brother or not." The promise in those words was absolute, and Marcus heard it clearly. He looked from Alexander to Emma, his expression unreadable, then nodded once. "So be it," he said. "But don't expect the rest of the pack to accept you're human. They'll see her as a weakness, just like I do." "Then they'll learn differently," Alexander replied. "Just like you did." Marcus gathered the remains of his followers and disappeared into the forest without another word. Emma didn't think they would see him again, not because he wouldn't try to cause trouble, but because he was smart enough to know he couldn't win a direct confrontation. When the sounds of their departure faded, Alexander turned to Emma with eyes that held exhaustion, relief, and something deeper. A vulnerability she'd never seen before. "It's over," he said, but his voice held no triumph. "For now." Emma went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and holding him close. She could feel his emotional turmoil through their bond. Guilt over Marcus, worry about what came next, fear that she might realize what she'd gotten herself into and run. "I'm not going anywhere," she said against his chest. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." "Emma," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you need to understand what you've agreed to. Being mated to an alpha isn't like human marriage. The bond between us, it's permanent, unbreakable. You'll share in my strength, my responsibilities, my burdens. The pack will look to you for guidance, for leadership. You'll never be able to go back to your old life." Emma pulled back to look at him, seeing the fear in his beautiful blue eyes. He was terrified that she would change her mind, that the reality of what he was offering would be too much for her to handle. "Good," she said simply. "I didn't much like my old life anyway." Alexander stared at her for a moment, then threw back his head and laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed off the mountains. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and breathless. When he set her down, his expression was serious again. "There's something else you need to know," he said. "Something about yourself that you probably don't realize yet." Emma felt a flutter of apprehension. "What do you mean?" "Your grandmother's journal," Alexander said. "Did you ever wonder how she knew so much about our kind? How she knew to leave you that cabin at exactly the right time and place for us to meet?" Emma's eyes widened as the implications sank in. "She was one of you?" "Not exactly," Alexander said gently. "But she carried the bloodline. Dormant, but present, and she passed it to you." "Are you saying I'm going to turn into a wolf?" Emma asked, not sure if she was excited or terrified by the prospect. "Not unless you choose to," Alexander explained. "The ability is there, in your genes, but but it needs to be awakened by the mating bond with a true alpha. It's rare. Maybe one human in 1,000 carries the recessive gene. But when they find their destined mate... He trailed off, letting her draw her own conclusions. Emma absorbed this information, feeling pieces of the puzzle click into place. Her grandmother's strange stories, her own instant connection with Alexander, the way she'd been able to restore his strength through touch. It all made sense now. "So I could learn to shift?" she asked. "If you want to," Alexander said. "But Emma, you need to understand. Once you make that choice, there really is no going back. You'll be one of us completely." Emma thought about her old life, the corporate job she'd hated, the relationship that had turned out to be built on lies, the constant feeling that she was living someone else's dream. Then she looked at Alexander, at this magnificent man who had risked everything to protect her, who offered her a world of magic and wonder and purpose. "Teach me," she said. Chapter 7. Betrayal and Sacrifice. 3 days later, Emma was beginning to understand why Alexander had tried to warn her about the challenges of pack life. They had left the cabin and traveled deeper into the mountains, to a hidden valley where Alexander's pack made their home. Emma had expected something primitive, caves or rough shelters, but instead found a thriving community that blended the best of both human and wolf cultures. The pack lived in comfortable cabins scattered throughout the valley, connected by well-maintained trails. They had solar power, satellite internet, and all the modern conveniences. But they also had vast areas of wild forest where they could run free in their wolf forms. It was beautiful, and the pack members were unfailingly polite to Emma. But she could feel their skepticism, their doubt about whether a human, even one with dormant shifter blood, could truly understand their ways. "Give them time," Alexander said as they walked through the central village on their third evening. "They've never seen an alpha take a human mate before. They're not sure what to expect." "Neither am I," Emma admitted. She'd been trying to learn about pack dynamics, about the complex hierarchy and traditions that governed their society. It was overwhelming, and she sometimes wondered if she was in over her head. "You're doing fine," Alexander assured her, his arm warm around her shoulders. "Besides, tomorrow night is the full moon. Once you complete your first transformation, once they see you as truly one of us, their acceptance will follow." Emma nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. The idea of shape-shifting excited and terrified her in equal measure. Alexander had been working with her, helping her connect with the wolf spirit that supposedly lay dormant in her genes. She could feel it sometimes, a wild, restless energy that yearned to run free, but she hadn't managed to shift yet. "What if I can't do it?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her. "What if the bloodline is too weak?" "It's not," Alexander said firmly. "I can sense your wolf, Emma. She's there, just waiting for the right moment to emerge." They had reached Alexander's cabin, their cabin now, Emma supposed, when Rebecca approached them. Rebecca was Alexander's second-in-command, a striking woman with silver blonde hair and amber eyes who had been nothing but professional in her interactions with Emma. But Emma could sense the other woman's disapproval, carefully hidden beneath layers of pack loyalty. "Alpha," Rebecca said, her tone formal. "The Council of Elders has requested a meeting." Alexander frowned. "What about?" Rebecca's eyes flicked to Emma, then back to Alexander. "They have concerns about tomorrow night's ceremony." Emma felt her stomach drop. The ceremony Rebecca referred to was the formal recognition of their mating bond, combined with Emma's first transformation. It was supposed to be a celebration, but clearly not everyone saw it that way. "What kind of concerns?" Alexander asked, his voice taking on the dangerous edge Emma had learned to recognize. "Perhaps it would be better discussed privately," Rebecca suggested. "No," Alexander said firmly. Emma is my mate. She has the right to hear anything that concerns her. Rebecca inclined her head, though Emma could see her reluctance. Very well. Some of the elders question whether it's wise to proceed with the bonding ceremony before Emma has proven she can actually shift. They worry that if she fails. She trailed off diplomatically. If I fail, it reflects badly on Alexander's choice, Emma finished. Is that it? Among other things, Rebecca admitted. There are also concerns about the timing. Marcus and his followers are still out there, and some feel this is not the moment for the pack to show any sign of weakness. My mate is not a weakness, Alexander growled, his protective instincts flaring. I'm not saying she is, Rebecca said carefully, but others might see it that way. Perhaps it would be better to wait, to give Emma more time to develop her abilities before making the bond official. Emma felt a flash of anger. These people were talking about her future, her relationship, as if she were a child who couldn't make her own decisions. But beneath the anger was a deeper fear. What if they were right? What if she wasn't strong enough for this world? I want to meet with the council, she said, surprising both Alexander and Rebecca. Tonight? Emma, you don't have to, Alexander began. Yes, I do, she interrupted. If they have concerns about me, they should voice them to my face. Rebecca looked impressed despite herself. Very well, I'll arrange it. An hour later, Emma found herself facing the Council of Elders in the pack's meeting hall. There were 7 of them, ranging in age from middle-aged to ancient, all studying her with varying degrees of skepticism. The eldest, a woman named Sarah with white hair and knowing green eyes, spoke first. You want to join our pack, young Emma. But do you understand what that means? I'm learning, Emma replied honestly. I know there's still a lot I don't understand about your culture, your traditions. But I'm willing to learn, and I'm committed to being worthy of Alexander's trust. Commitment is not enough, said Thomas, a grizzled man with scars across half his face. Our alpha needs a strong mate, someone who can share his burdens and protect the pack if necessary. You're human, untrained, untested. But I carry the bloodline, Emma pointed out. Alexander says he can sense my wolf. Alexander is blinded by emotion, Thomas replied bluntly. Love makes fools of even the wisest alphas. Emma felt Alexander tense beside her, but she held up a hand to stop him from responding. This was her fight. You're right, she said, surprising the council. Alexander does love me, and maybe that does affect his judgment. But I know what I felt when those wolves attacked the cabin. I know the power that flowed between us when Alexander was injured. That wasn't imagination or wishful thinking. That was real. Perhaps, said Sarah diplomatically. But the question remains. Are you ready to risk everything on tomorrow night's ceremony? If you fail to shift, if the bonding fails, it will weaken Alexander's position at a time when the pack needs strong leadership. Emma looked around the circle of faces, seeing doubt and concern rather than outright hostility. These people weren't trying to hurt her. They were trying to protect their pack, their way of life. What if I postponed the ceremony? She asked quietly. Took more time to prepare, to prove myself? No, Alexander said immediately. Emma, you don't need to prove anything to anyone. But maybe I do, she replied, her heart breaking at the pain in his eyes. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm rushing into something I'm not ready for. If you postpone now, it will be seen as a sign of weakness, Rebecca said gently. It might actually make things worse. Emma felt trapped between impossible choices. Move forward and risk public failure, or step back and undermine Alexander's authority. Either way, she might end up hurting the man she loved. There is another option, Sarah said quietly. An old tradition that hasn't been used in decades. What kind of tradition? Alexander asked suspiciously. The trial of the heart, Sarah replied. 3 tests, designed to prove that a potential mate truly understands what it means to be part of the pack. If Emma passes, no one can question her right to stand at your side. And if I fail? Emma asked. Sarah's expression was grave. Then you leave the pack and never return. The bonding is dissolved, and Alexander must choose another mate within the year. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. The stakes were even higher than the original ceremony. Not just public embarrassment, but permanent separation from Alexander. It's too dangerous, Alexander said immediately. I won't risk losing her. It's my choice, Emma said, her voice stronger than she felt. What are the tests? Sarah studied her for a long moment. The first tests your courage. You must face a threat to the pack and prove you will protect them even at risk to yourself. The second tests your wisdom. You must solve a problem that affects the entire community. The third tests your heart. You must choose between your own desires and the good of the pack. Emma swallowed hard. When? Tomorrow, during the day. If you succeed, the bonding ceremony proceeds as planned that night. If you fail... Sarah didn't finish the sentence. Emma looked at Alexander, seeing her own fear reflected in his blue eyes. This was insane, reckless, potentially suicidal. But it was also the only way to silence the doubts, both the pack's and her own. I'll do it, she said. The council murmured among themselves, some looking impressed by her courage, others convinced she was sealing her own doom. Alexander said nothing, but she could feel his anguish through their bond. As they walked back to their cabin in silence, Emma wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. But she also felt a strange sense of clarity. Tomorrow would prove, once and for all, whether she belonged in this world or not. Either way, she would finally know where she stood. Chapter 8. Emotional Breakthrough. Emma slept poorly that night, haunted by dreams of running through dark forests while unseen. Predators pursued her. She woke before dawn to find Alexander already up, standing by the window and staring out at the valley with troubled eyes. You can still change your mind, he said without turning around. Call off the trial, postpone the ceremony. I'll handle whatever political fallout comes from it. You know I can't do that, Emma replied, climbing out of bed to wrap her arms around him from behind. If I back down now, I'll never have their respect. And I'll never respect myself. Alexander leaned into her embrace, but she could feel the tension in his muscles. I'm scared, he admitted quietly. Not of losing my position as alpha. I'm scared of losing you. You won't lose me, Emma said, pressing her lips to his shoulder. No matter what happens today, you won't lose me. But even as she said the words, Emma wondered if they were true. The trial of the heart was designed to be difficult, possibly impossible. What if she wasn't strong enough? What if the wolf blood in her veins wasn't sufficient to see her through? They had breakfast in silence, then made their way to the central clearing where the pack was already gathering. Word of the trial had spread quickly, and it seemed like every member of the community had turned out to watch. Sarah stood in the center of the clearing, looking older and more mysterious than ever in the morning light. Beside her stood a young man Emma didn't recognize, tall and lean with nervous eyes, and the bearing of someone trying very hard to look brave. Emma Thorne, Sarah announced as Emma approached. You have requested the trial of the heart. Are you prepared to face the consequences of success or failure? I am, Emma replied, her voice carrying further than she'd expected in the clear mountain air. Then let the first test begin. Sarah gestured to the young man beside her. This is David. Not your David, but one of our youngest pack members. 3 days ago, he was injured in a climbing accident and has been trapped on a ledge halfway up Devil's Peak. The rescue teams say it's too dangerous to attempt a recovery. David will certainly die if no one reaches him by nightfall. Emma looked up at the mountain Sarah indicated, her heart sinking. Devil's Peak was aptly named. A nearly vertical face of rock and ice that looked impossible to climb even with proper equipment. The ledge where David was trapped was barely visible as a dark smudge against the gray stone. Your first test is this, Sarah continued. Reach David and bring him down safely. You may use any means at your disposal, but you must do it alone. Emma stared at the mountain, her mind racing. She had some rock climbing experience from her college days, but nothing that would prepare her for this. The peak was at least 1,000 feet high, and the conditions were treacherous. This is insane, Alexander said, moving to stand beside her. No one could make that climb without specialized gear and an experienced team. The trial is meant to test Emma's resourcefulness as well as her courage, Sarah replied calmly. If she cannot find a way to save David, then how can she be trusted to protect the pack? Emma studied the mountain more carefully, looking for any possible route to the trapped pack member. The obvious paths were clearly too dangerous, but maybe... I need rope, she said suddenly, and a radio to communicate with David. There's climbing gear in the equipment shed, Rebecca offered. I can show you... No, Sarah interrupted. The candidate must gather her own resources. Emma nodded, understanding. This wasn't just about the rescue, it was about proving she could think and act independently under pressure. She jogged toward the equipment shed, her mind working frantically. She found rope, climbing harnesses, and other gear. But as she studied the mountain again, she realized the conventional approach really was suicide. The rock face was too sheer, too unstable. She needed another way. That's when she remembered something Alexander had told her about pack dynamics. Wolves were social animals, and the pack always worked together to solve problems that no individual could handle alone. Emma grabbed a radio and climbed to the highest point she could reach on foot, a rocky outcropping that brought her about a quarter of the way up the mountain. From there, she could see David more clearly, a small figure huddled on a narrow ledge, clearly in pain and probably suffering from exposure. David, she called into the radio. Can you hear me? A faint response crackled back. Emma? Is that really you up there? I'm here to get you down, she replied. But I need you to help me. Are you injured badly enough that you can't move? Twisted ankle, David replied, his voice weak but determined. Maybe a broken rib. But I can move if I have to. Emma studied the rock face above David's position, looking for a route he might be able to manage with assistance. There, a series of natural handholds and ledges that formed a rough path down the mountain. It wasn't easy, but it was possible. David, I want you to look to your left. Do you see that series of ledges leading down? Yeah, but Emma, I can't... Yes, you can, she interrupted firmly. I'm going to set up a rope system to help support you. But David, you have to trust me and you have to be brave. Can you do that? There was a long pause then. For the pack? Yes. Emma spent the next hour setting up an elaborate pulley system using the climbing gear and natural rock formations. It wasn't perfect, but it would give David the support he needed to make the descent. More importantly, it would allow her to control his rate of descent and catch him if he fell. The actual rescue took another 2 hours and tested every limit of Emma's endurance and ingenuity. David was weak and in pain, and several times Emma thought they were both going to plummet to their deaths. But she kept talking to him, encouraging him, guiding him through each difficult section. When they finally reached the bottom, both of them collapsed in exhaustion. David's ankle was indeed broken, and he had several cracked ribs, but he was alive. The pack members who had gathered to watch burst into cheers, and Emma felt a surge of pride and accomplishment unlike anything she'd ever experienced. "Well done," Sarah said, her voice holding a warmth that hadn't been there before. "The first test is passed. But there are still 2 more." Emma nodded, too tired to speak. Alexander appeared at her side, helping her to her feet with gentle hands. "You were magnificent," he murmured against her ear. "I've never been more proud of anyone in my life." But there was no time to rest. Sarah was already explaining the second test. "The pack faces a crisis," the elder announced. "Our traditional hunting grounds have been declared off-limits by the federal government. New regulations classify the entire area as a protected wildlife preserve. Without access to those lands, we cannot hunt in our wolf forms, cannot teach our young the old ways. Some suggest we should ignore the human laws and hunt anyway, risking exposure. Others believe we should relocate the entire pack to Canada. As our potential Luna, Emma, you must find a solution that protects both our traditions and our secrecy." Emma's heart sank. This was exactly the kind of complex political problem she had no experience with. How was she supposed to find a solution that had eluded the pack's experienced leaders? "You have until sunset," Sarah added. "Present your solution to the full pack assembly." Emma spent the afternoon researching everything she could about federal wildlife regulations, pack territories, and legal precedents. She interviewed pack members about their specific needs and concerns. She studied maps and legal documents until her eyes burned. As the sun began to set, she still felt like she was missing something crucial. The obvious solutions all had fatal flaws. Relocating would destroy the pack's connection to ancestral lands, while ignoring human laws risked everything they'd built. Then, as she was reviewing her notes one more time, she noticed something interesting in the federal documentation. The wildlife preserve designation was specifically for protecting an endangered species of elk that used the area as breeding grounds. But the elk only used a small portion of the pack's traditional territory, and only during specific months of the year. Emma's solution was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of fighting the designation or abandoning the territory, the pack could work with the government. They could apply to become official guardians of the preserve, using their intimate knowledge of the land to help protect the elk while maintaining their own access during non-breeding seasons. Better yet, they could leverage their connections in the outdoor recreation industry to develop ecotourism programs that would provide income for the pack while giving them a legitimate reason to maintain a presence in the area. When Emma presented her plan to the pack assembly, the response was immediate and positive. Even the most skeptical elders had to admit that her solution addressed all their major concerns while actually strengthening their position. "The second test is passed," Sarah announced, and Emma heard genuine respect in the elder's voice. But the final test was still to come, and from Sarah's grave expression, Emma knew it would be the most difficult. "The third test is simple to explain, but hard to execute," Sarah said. "You must choose between your own desires and the good of the pack. Alexander faces a challenge that threatens his life and his position as alpha. You can save him, but only by sacrificing something precious to you. Choose wisely. Your decision will define your place in our world forever." Before Emma could ask what she meant, chaos erupted at the edge of the clearing. Marcus had returned, but he wasn't alone. He'd brought with him nearly 20 wolves from other packs, rogues and outcasts who had their own reasons for wanting to see Alexander fall. "Brother," Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the assembly, "I invoke the right of final challenge. Face me now, or abdicate your position and leave our territory forever." Alexander rose slowly, his expression grim. Emma could feel his exhaustion through their bond. The stress of the day, the worry for her safety, the accumulated weight of leadership. He was in no condition to fight Marcus, let alone Marcus and his allies. "This is the choice," Sarah said quietly to Emma. "Alexander will fight because his honor demands it, but he cannot win in his current state. You could save him by invoking your right as his chosen mate to fight in his place. But Emma, you haven't completed your transformation yet. You would face Marcus as a human against his wolf form. It would be suicide." Emma stared at the scene unfolding before her. Marcus and his followers were spreading out around the clearing, clearly intending to ensure this fight had only one possible outcome. Alexander was checking his weapons with the methodical precision of a man preparing to die. "There has to be another way," Emma said desperately. "There is," Sarah replied. "You could renounce your claim as Alexander's mate. Without you to worry about, without the distraction of protecting you, he might have a chance. But if you make that choice, you can never change your mind. The bond will be severed permanently." Emma felt her world tilting on its axis. Save Alexander by sacrificing herself, or save their bond and watch him die. Either choice would destroy something precious and irreplaceable. She looked at Alexander, seeing him check his weapons with resigned determination. He had already accepted that he might not survive the night, but he was prepared to die rather than give up his responsibilities to the pack. In that moment, Emma finally understood what it meant to be a true alpha's mate. It wasn't about power or status or even love. It was about being willing to sacrifice everything for the good of those you protected. "I invoke the right of substitution," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet clearing. Alexander's head snapped up, his blue eyes wide with horror. "Emma, no." "I claim the right to fight in my alpha's place," she continued, ignoring his protests. "But I don't fight as a human." Emma closed her eyes and reached deep within herself, searching for the wolf spirit Alexander had always insisted was there. She thought about everything she'd learned over the past week. About courage, about sacrifice, about the fierce love that bound pack members together. "Come," she called to her inner wolf. "Come and help me protect our family." The transformation hit her like lightning, power coursing through her body as bones shifted and muscles reconfigured. It was nothing like she'd imagined. Not painful, but exhilarating. Like coming home after a lifetime of being lost. When the change was complete, Emma stood in the center of the clearing in her wolf form for the first time. She was smaller than Alexander, smaller than Marcus, but she carried herself with a confidence that made several of the watching wolves step back. Marcus stared at her in shock. "Impossible! Humans can't—" "I'm not human," Emma replied, surprised to discover she could speak in wolf form. "I'm Luna of the Northwestern Pack, and I challenge you for the right to protect my mate and my family." The fight that followed was nothing like the brutal battle between Alexander and Marcus. Emma fought with intelligence rather than strength, speed rather than power. She used every dirty trick she'd ever learned, every bit of knowledge about wolf behavior she'd absorbed from her grandmother's journal. Most importantly, she fought with the desperate fury of a mother protecting her children. The pack was her family now, and she would die before she let Marcus destroy what they'd built. The battle ended when Emma managed to get behind Marcus and lock her jaws around his throat in the same hold Alexander had used days earlier. But unlike Alexander, she felt no familial love to stay her hand. "Yield," she growled, "or die." Marcus yielded. As his followers melted away into the forest, Emma shifted back to human form and collapsed into Alexander's waiting arms. She had passed all 3 tests, proven herself worthy to stand at an alpha's side. But more than that, she had finally found where she belonged. Chapter 9. Love Revealed. The bonding ceremony took place that night under the light of the full moon, with the entire pack gathered in the sacred grove that had witnessed such rituals for generations. Emma wore a simple white dress that seemed to glow in the moonlight, while Alexander stood beside her in ceremonial robes that marked him as Alpha. Sarah presided over the ceremony, her ancient voice carrying the weight of tradition as she spoke the words that would bind Emma and Alexander together for eternity. Do you, Alexander, Alpha of the Northwestern Pack, take this woman as your true mate? Do you promise to share with her your strength, your wisdom, and your heart to protect her with your life and honor her with your trust? I do, Alexander replied, his voice strong and clear in the forest silence. Do you, Emma, chosen Luna of the Northwestern Pack, accept this bond? Do you promise to stand beside your Alpha in times of peace and war, to share his burdens and his joys, to be his partner in all things until the moon falls from the sky? Emma looked out at the assembled pack, her pack now, and saw acceptance in their eyes. She had proven herself worthy through courage, wisdom, and sacrifice. She belonged here, with these people, in this wild and wonderful world. I do, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the grove. Sarah raised her hands to the moon, speaking words in the old language that Emma somehow understood, despite never hearing them before. The ritual concluded with Alexander and Emma drinking from a shared cup of ceremonial wine, sealing their bond in the eyes of Pack and Moon alike. As the last words faded, Emma felt something shift within her, not physically, but spiritually. She was connected now, not just to Alexander, but to every member of the pack, part of a family that extended far beyond blood relations. The celebration that followed lasted until dawn, with pack members sharing stories, singing songs, and welcoming their new Luna with genuine warmth. Emma found herself dancing around the bonfire in her wolf form, running through the forest with her new family, experiencing the pure joy of belonging somewhere completely. When she and Alexander finally returned to their cabin as the sun was rising, both of them were exhausted but happy. Emma curled up against Alexander's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. "Only one," Emma replied, lifting her head to look at him. Alexander's expression tightened with concern. "What?" "I regret that it took me 26 years to find you," she said with a smile. Alexander laughed, the sound rich and warm in the morning quiet. "We found each other when we were meant to," he said. "Fate doesn't make mistakes." "Do you really believe that?" Emma asked. "That we were destined to meet?" "I believe," Alexander said, pulling her closer, "that some souls are made for each other. I believe that you and I have been searching for each other our whole lives, even when we didn't know what we were looking for. And I believe that what we have is strong enough to survive anything the world throws at us." Emma kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into the contact. She had found her home, her family, her purpose. She had found herself. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "And I love you," he replied. "My Luna. My mate. My heart." Chapter 10. Final Challenge. Their happiness lasted exactly 3 weeks. Emma woke on a cold October morning to find Alexander standing by the window, his expression grim as he read something on his phone. The tension in his posture made her stomach clench with dread. "What is it?" she asked, throwing on a robe and joining him at the window. "The Council of Packs has called an emergency meeting," he said, handing her the phone. "Someone has been talking to the human authorities about our kind." Emma read the message, her heart sinking with each word. Apparently, a rogue wolf had been captured by government agents and had revealed the existence of shapeshifters in exchange for his freedom. The entire supernatural community was in an uproar, and the council wanted to meet immediately to decide how to respond. "How bad is this?" Emma asked. "Potentially catastrophic," Alexander replied grimly. "For centuries, our survival has depended on secrecy." If the human world learns about us. He didn't finish the sentence, but Emma could imagine the possibilities. Fear, persecution, possibly even attempts at extermination. The meeting is today, Alexander continued. I have to go. We have to go, Emma corrected. I'm your mate, your partner in this. We face threats together, remember? Alexander looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded instead. It could be dangerous. If the council decides that contact with humans has made us too visible, too vulnerable, they might decide that having a human-born Luna is a liability, Emma finished. I understand. But running away won't solve anything. They left for the meeting within the hour, traveling to a remote location in the Canadian Rockies, where representatives from dozens of packs had gathered. Emma had never seen so many shapeshifters in one place, and the air practically thrummed with supernatural energy. The mood was tense and fearful, with various alphas arguing about how to respond to the crisis. Some wanted to relocate their entire communities to even more remote areas. Others suggested more aggressive solutions, eliminating the humans who posed a threat. The problem, declared Alpha Morrison from the Eastern Seaboard Pack, is that we've become too comfortable with human contact, too willing to integrate with their world. It's made us careless. Emma felt the accusation in his words, the implication that her presence in Alexander's life was part of the problem. Integration isn't the issue, Alexander replied calmly. Isolation is what makes us vulnerable. The more we separate ourselves from human society, the more suspicious our activities become. Easy words from someone whose mate used to be human, Morrison sneered. Tell me, Thorn, how do we know your Luna won't betray our secrets the first time you have a lover's quarrel? Emma felt Alexander's anger flare through their bond, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. This was exactly the kind of challenge she'd expected, and she was prepared for it. Because, Emma said, rising to face Morrison directly, I've already proven my loyalty by choosing your world over my old life. Because I've passed the trial of the heart and earned my place here. And because, unlike a rogue wolf who betrays his own people to save his skin, I understand what honor means. Morrison's eyes flashed with anger, but before he could respond, another alpha spoke up. The question isn't Emma's loyalty, said Alpha Chen from the Pacific Northwest. The question is what we do about the exposure. The rogue has been contained, but the information is already in government hands. Then we need to know exactly what they know, Emma said, an idea forming in her mind. And the best way to do that is from the inside. Alexander looked at her sharply. Emma, what are you thinking? I still have contacts in the human world, she explained. Government connections from my old job in environmental consulting. People who might be able to find out what agencies are involved, what they know, what they're planning. Absolutely not, Alexander said immediately. You're not going back to that world. Not going back, Emma corrected. Going in. There's a difference. The debate that followed was intense and sometimes hostile, but eventually the council agreed to Emma's plan. She would return to human society temporarily, using her old connections to gather intelligence about the government's knowledge of shapeshifters. Alexander hated the idea, but he had to admit it was their best option for understanding the scope of the threat they faced. The hardest part was the separation. Emma would have to sever her connection to the pack temporarily, suppressing her wolf nature to avoid detection by any supernatural sensing equipment the government might have developed. It won't be for long, she promised Alexander as they prepared for her departure. A few weeks at most. A few weeks without our bond, he replied, his voice tight with pain. Emma, I don't know if I can... You have to, she said firmly. The pack needs you to be strong, to lead them through this crisis. I need you to be strong. The night before she left, They made love with desperate intensity, as if they could somehow store up enough connection to last through their separation. Emma memorized every touch, every whispered endearment, knowing it would have to sustain her through the lonely days ahead. Emma's return to human society was jarring after weeks in the supernatural world. The noise, the pollution, the constant rush of people who seemed disconnected from the natural world around them. It all felt foreign and overwhelming. But her old contacts were still willing to help, and within days she had managed to infiltrate a government task force that was investigating unusual wildlife behavior in remote areas. The official story was that they were studying the effects of climate change on animal migration patterns. But Emma quickly realized they were actually hunting for shapeshifters. The information she gathered was both reassuring and terrifying. The government knew shapeshifters existed, but they had no idea of the true scope of the supernatural community. They thought they were dealing with a few isolated individuals rather than organized packs spread across the continent. On the other hand, they were taking the threat seriously. Emma discovered plans for capture operations, research facilities designed to study supernatural beings, and containment protocols that made her blood run cold. She transmitted everything she learned back to the pack through carefully coded messages, but the separation from Alexander was taking its toll. Without their mate bond, she felt incomplete, hollow, like half her soul was missing. It was during her third week undercover that everything went wrong. Emma was leaving a meeting when she spotted a familiar figure across the street. Marcus, Alexander's brother, talking to a man in a government suit. The conversation was brief, but Emma saw money change hands, and her heart sank as she realized what was happening. Marcus wasn't just a rogue wolf seeking power. He was actively collaborating with the humans, selling information about pack locations and activities. Emma tried to follow them discreetly, but Marcus spotted her reflection in a storefront window. Their eyes met across the busy street, and Emma saw him smile, the same cold, predatory expression she remembered from the cabin. She ran, but it was too late. Within hours, government agents were surrounding her hotel, and Emma realized her cover was blown. Worse, they seemed to know exactly what she was. "Emma Thorne," said Agent Sarah Mitchell, the task force leader Emma had been working with. Or should I say, Luna of the Northwestern Pack? Emma's heart sank as she realized the full scope of Marcus's betrayal. He hadn't just revealed her identity, he'd exposed the entire pack structure. "We know about your kind," Mitchell continued. "We know about the packs, the alphas, the territorial structures, and we know you're going to help us contact them." "I won't betray my people," Emma said firmly. "You don't have a choice," Mitchell replied. "We have evidence of your supernatural activities, your involvement with a terrorist organization that threatens national security. Cooperate, and we might be lenient. Refuse, and you'll disappear into a research facility where we can study exactly what makes you so special." Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible choice settling on her shoulders. Betray the pack to save herself, or sacrifice herself to protect them. It was the trial of the heart all over again. But this time there was no clever solution, no way to save everyone. In the end, the choice was easy. "Go to hell," she told Agent Mitchell. Chapter 11. Resolution. Emma had been in government custody for 3 days when Alexander came for her. She didn't see the rescue itself. She was locked in a windowless cell deep underground, cut off from any connection to the outside world. But she felt the moment Alexander arrived, their mate bond suddenly blazing back to life despite the drugs they'd been using to suppress her supernatural abilities. The facility shook with the force of his fury, and Emma could hear alarms blaring throughout the complex. Then the lights went out, and in the darkness that followed, she heard the sounds of a battle unlike anything she'd ever imagined. When her cell door finally opened, Alexander stood silhouetted against the emergency lighting, magnificent and terrible in his rage. His clothes were torn and bloodied, his eyes blazing with inhuman light. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion as he gathered her into his arms. "I'm fine," Emma assured him, though she was anything but. The drugs had left her weak and disoriented, and the psychological pressure of interrogation had pushed her to her limits. "We need to go," Alexander said, lifting her easily. "The others are holding the perimeter, but we don't have much time." As they moved through the facility, Emma caught glimpses of the carnage Alexander had left in his wake. This hadn't been a subtle rescue operation. This had been a declaration of war. "How many?" she asked, afraid of the answer. "Enough to send a message," Alexander replied grimly. "They took my mate. They threatened my pack. There are consequences for such actions." They emerged into the night to find a scene that looked like something from a movie. Government vehicles burned in the parking lot, and shapeshifters in both human and wolf form stood guard around the perimeter. The task force facility had been completely compromised. "Alexander," Emma said as they reached the extraction point, "Marcus was working with them. He's the one who betrayed us." Alexander's expression went cold with deadly promise. "I know. We found him." Emma looked around, but she didn't see Marcus among the other wolves. "Where is he?" "Gone," Alexander said simply, and something in his tone suggested Marcus wouldn't be causing problems for anyone ever again. The flight back to pack territory was a blur of exhaustion and relief. Emma slept fitfully against Alexander's chest, their bond restored but fragile after the forced separation. She could feel his protective fury still burning beneath his calm exterior, his determination to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. When they finally arrived at the valley, Emma was surprised to find the entire pack preparing to move. "We can't stay here," Alexander explained when she asked. "The government knows about this location now." "It's too dangerous." "Where will we go?" Emma asked. "North," Rebecca replied, appearing beside them with a map. "There are territories in Alaska that should be safe, at least for a while." Emma nodded, understanding the necessity, even as her heart broke a little. This valley had been her first real home, the place where she'd discovered who she truly was. But home wasn't a place. It was the people you shared it with. The pack worked with incredible efficiency, dismantling their community and preparing for the journey north. Watching them, Emma was struck by their resilience, their ability to adapt and survive no matter what challenges they faced. "I'm sorry," she said to Alexander as they supervised the evacuation. "This is my fault. If I hadn't gone back—" "Stop," Alexander interrupted, turning to face her directly. "You did exactly what needed to be done. You gathered intelligence that saved lives, and you refused to betray us even under torture. You have nothing to apologize for. But Marcus? Marcus made his choices long before you came into our lives," Alexander said firmly. "His betrayal was about his own ambitions, not about you." Emma nodded, but she still felt the weight of responsibility. The pack was being forced to abandon their home because of a crisis that had escalated during her rescue mission. The journey north took 2 weeks, with the pack traveling in small groups to avoid detection. Emma and Alexander led the main contingent, guiding their people through wilderness areas and back roads toward their new sanctuary. Alaska proved to be everything they'd hoped for. Vast, wild, and largely untouched by human development. The pack established their new home in a remote valley accessible only by plane or a 3-day hike through some of the most challenging terrain in North America. It was beautiful and isolated, but Emma missed the old territory with an ache that surprised her. She tried to hide her melancholy, but Alexander noticed everything. "You're grieving," he said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the new valley in shades of gold and crimson. A little, Emma admitted. I know this is necessary, but that was where we fell in love, Alexander finished. Where you became part of the pack, where we bonded. It held all our important memories. Emma nodded, feeling tears sting her eyes. I keep thinking about the cabin where I first found you. I wonder if anyone will ever know what happened there, what it meant. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, then he smiled. The same warm, loving expression that had made her fall for him in the first place. Emma, he said gently, home isn't a place. Home is what we build together, wherever we are. The cabin was special because we were there together. This valley will become special for the same reason. As if to prove his point, a group of young pack members ran past them in wolf form, playing and wrestling in the grass. Children who had been born in the old territory but who would grow up thinking of Alaska as home. Besides, Alexander added with a grin, I have something that might help. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wooden box that Emma recognized immediately. It was carved from the same pine as her grandmother's cabin, and it held the simple gold ring David had given her, the ring she'd thought represented everything fake about her old life. I had it reset, Alexander said, opening the box to reveal the ring transformed. The gold had been melted down and reformed, inlaid with a piece of carved antler and a small stone that seemed to glow with inner light. The stone is from the cave where you waited for me during the fight with Marcus, he explained. The antler is from the first deer I ever brought down in these mountains. And the gold, well, that's from your old life, transformed into something new. Emma stared at the ring, overwhelmed by the symbolism. Past and present, human and wolf, old life and new, all woven together into something beautiful and meaningful. Emma Thorne, Alexander said, dropping to one knee in the grass. Will you marry me? Not just as my mate in pack law, but as my wife in human law as well? Will you build a new home with me, wherever that might be? Emma didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, her voice strong and clear in the mountain air. Yes, to all of it. As Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, Emma felt the last piece of her transformation click into place. She was no longer the broken human who had fled into the mountains after her world collapsed. She was Luna of the Northwestern Pack, mate to an alpha king, and part of a family that would face whatever challenges came their way together. The wedding took place a month later under the Aurora Borealis, with the entire pack in attendance, and the northern lights dancing overhead like a blessing from the sky itself. Emma wore a dress made from white deer hide decorated with traditional beadwork, and Alexander stood beside her in ceremonial robes that had been passed down through generations of alphas. As they spoke their vows under the vast Alaskan sky, Emma thought about the journey that had brought them here. A year ago, she'd been a lonely human fleeing a broken relationship. Now she was surrounded by family, bonded to a man she loved completely, and living a life she'd never imagined possible. Any regrets? Alexander asked during their first dance as husband and wife, echoing the question he'd asked on their bonding night. Emma looked around at their new home, at the pack members celebrating around them, at the wild beauty of the northern wilderness. She thought about everything they'd gained and everything they'd sacrificed to be here. Only one, she said with a smile. What's that? Alexander asked, spinning her in a circle that made her laugh with pure joy. I regret that I only get to marry you once, she replied. I'd do it again every day if I could. Alexander threw back his head and laughed, the sound carrying across the valley like music. Around them, the pack howled their approval, and the northern lights danced brighter, as if the sky itself was celebrating their love. Emma had found her home at last, and it was perfect. Epilogue. New beginnings. 5 years later, Emma stood on the porch of their new cabin, watching 3 small shapes tumble through the snow in the yard below. Her children, 2 daughters and a son, all carrying the distinctive blue eyes of their father's bloodline, were playing in their wolf pup forms, wrestling and chasing each other with boundless energy. "They're getting big," Alexander said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Too big," Emma agreed with a laugh. Mara shifted for the first time yesterday. She's not even 3 years old. "Early bloomers run in the family," Alexander said with pride. "Do you remember when you were worried you wouldn't be able to shift at all?" Emma leaned back against his warmth, marveling at how completely her life had changed. The woman who had fled into the mountains all those years ago would never have imagined this. A loving husband, 3 remarkable children, and a community that felt more like family than any blood relations ever had. The pack had thrived in their Alaskan home. They'd established new traditions, new relationships with the land and wildlife around them. Some members had even found human partners of their own, expanding their definition of what it meant to be pack. The government had never found them again. Agent Mitchell's task force had been quietly disbanded after the facility incident, and the official record now listed the entire project as a case of mass hysteria and misidentified wildlife. Marcus's betrayal had ultimately backfired, providing so much conflicting and obviously fabricated information that the authorities had concluded there was nothing to investigate. "Mama," called their eldest daughter, Sophia, racing up to the porch in human form. "Daddy, come see what we found!" Emma and Alexander followed their daughter to the edge of the tree line, where the other children were clustered around something in the snow. As they approached, Emma saw what had caught their attention: fresh tracks in the snow that were definitely not from any of the local wildlife. "Wolf tracks," announced their son, Michael, with the authority of a 5-year-old expert tracker. "But not pack wolves." Emma and Alexander exchanged glances. Lone wolves occasionally passed through their territory, but these tracks were different, more purposeful, heading directly toward the heart of their valley rather than simply passing through. "New friends?" asked Mara hopefully, looking up at her parents with bright blue eyes. Before Emma could answer, a familiar howl echoed through the mountains, not threatening, but announcing. The sound of someone requesting permission to approach, following the ancient protocols of pack interaction. Alexander tilted his head, listening to something Emma couldn't quite hear. Then he smiled, and Emma felt his excitement and anticipation through their bond. "Not new friends," he said, lifting Mara into his arms. "Old ones." The wolf that emerged from the tree line was smaller than Alexander, with golden brown fur and intelligent amber eyes. But what made Emma gasp was the human scent that clung to the creature. Not pack-bonded human, but purely human, like she had been when Alexander first found her. The wolf approached slowly, respectfully, and shifted to human form when it was still several yards away. Emma found herself looking at a young woman, perhaps 25, with long dark hair and eyes that held the same lost, desperate quality Emma remembered seeing in her own mirror years ago. "Please," the woman said, her voice shaking with exhaustion and cold. "I don't know where else to go. Something's happening to me, and I'm scared, and everyone keeps telling me I'm crazy, but I know I'm not. I can smell things I shouldn't be able to smell, hear things that are too far away, and sometimes I dream about running through forests on 4 legs instead of 2. Emma felt her heart clench with recognition and sympathy. This woman was just like she had been, human-born but carrying the bloodline, awakening to abilities she didn't understand. "What's your name?" Emma asked gently, stepping forward. "Sarah," the woman replied. "Sarah Chen. I've been having these dreams about this place, about people who could help me understand what's happening. I've been traveling for weeks, following something I can't explain, and then I saw your valley and I just knew. Emma looked at Alexander, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. The pack had grown over the years, but always through careful recruitment or the mating of existing members. They'd never had someone simply arrive on their doorstep, drawn by instinct and dreams. "You're safe here," Emma said, making the decision instinctively. "Come inside, get warm, and we'll figure this out together." As they walked back toward the cabin, Sarah following uncertainly behind, Emma couldn't help but smile at the symmetry of it. 5 years ago, she had been the lost human seeking sanctuary in a world she didn't understand. Now she was the Luna welcoming another lost soul into the safety of the pack. "Look familiar?" Alexander murmured in her ear, his amusement clear. "Very," Emma replied. "Think we can help her?" "If anyone can, it's you," Alexander said with absolute confidence. "You've been where she is. You know what she needs to hear." Emma nodded, already mentally planning how to ease Sarah's transition into their world. It wouldn't be easy, it never was, but Emma remembered the loneliness and confusion of awakening abilities, and she was determined that Sarah wouldn't have to face those challenges alone. That evening, after Sarah had been fed and given warm clothes and a safe place to sleep, Emma stood once again on the porch looking out at her valley. The northern lights danced overhead, and she could hear the soft sounds of her family settling down for the night. "Thank you," she whispered to the sky, to fate, to whatever force had brought her to this moment. She had started this journey as a broken human fleeing a shattered life. Now she was a Luna, a mother, a protector of those who needed sanctuary. She had found not just love, but purpose. A reason to be strong, to be brave, to be everything she'd never known she could become. Behind her, the cabin glowed with warm light, filled with the laughter of her children, and the quiet conversation of pack members who had become family. Alexander emerged onto the porch, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee, still made exactly the way she liked it, just as it had been that first morning when she thought she was going crazy. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, handing her a mug and settling beside her on the porch swing. "Just thinking about beginnings," Emma replied, snuggling against his warmth. "About how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that ever could have happened." "David and Sarah?" Alexander asked. "Us," Emma corrected. "David cheating on me, the storm, hitting you on that mountain road. It all felt like the end of the world at the time, but it was really the beginning of everything." Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then he chuckled softly. "You know, I've never told you the whole truth about that night." Emma looked up at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I wasn't just running from Marcus," Alexander admitted. "I was running toward something. I'd been having dreams for months before we met. Dreams of a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands. Someone who would understand me completely. I was heading toward your grandmother's cabin because something was calling me there." "Fate?" Emma asked. "Love," Alexander replied simply. "Even before we met, even when I was just a wolf running through a blizzard, I was already in love with you. My soul recognized yours long before our eyes ever met." Emma felt tears sting her eyes, overwhelmed by the beauty and impossibility of it all. "So, we were always meant to find each other?" "Always," Alexander confirmed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Through every lifetime, across every obstacle, no matter what form we take or what world we're born into, we're meant to be together." Inside the cabin, baby Michael started crying, and Emma could hear Sophia's voice trying to comfort him. Her family needed her pack needed her, and tomorrow she would help Sarah begin her own journey of transformation and discovery. But for now, in this perfect moment, Emma was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of her true mate, surrounded by the love they had built together, looking out at a world full of infinite possibilities. The northern lights danced overhead like a blessing, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled a song of contentment and joy. Emma closed her eyes and let herself feel it all. The love, the belonging, the deep satisfaction of a life lived fully and without regret. She had stayed pure until her alpha king returned to her, and what she had done to prove her love had indeed been enough. More than enough. It had been everything. And it was only the beginning.